whatever metric you choose to use, we are pound for pound best in the world. And that is an underleveraged, underutilised asset that I want to help untap, as it were. And I suppose that's why I took the job. That's why I was interested in the role, is that I see huge potential, even more potential than we have realised in the past. And I'd like to help the organisation and the wider sector in delivering that for the good of the country. So we redelineated our mission statement, which hasn't really changed since UKRI was formed, or indeed, frankly, since the councils have been operating for decades previously. But try to make it very simple and memorable, and so we have these 3 clauses: to advance knowledge, to improve lives, and to drive growth, which breaks down to supporting the curiosity-driven discovery research, where that is the foundation of everything that we build upon. And UKRI is the custodian for that. Not only are we delineating our budget into these 3 buckets now, but the whole of government R&D is delineated into those 3 buckets. And lo and behold, UKRI is far and away the largest contributor to discovery research. In fact, about 80% of all discovery research is funded through UKRI out of the public purse. And so we really do see our role as being the custodian and the guardian of curiosity-driven research. The second part of our mission, to improve lives, now the rest of government really contributes significantly there. So, you know, MOD and DH and DESNES and some other big spending departments, DEFRA, have significant research budgets which are aligned to application of research to near-term problems. But of course, UKRI has a role, and we have to do that bridging and that catalysing of taking discovery, translating it into application, and helping to cohere the sector. And then lastly, the drive growth part of our mission. I think you can have a brilliant curiosity-driven discovery research sector, but if you don't generate economic return from that, you can't sustain it, because it requires investment. And frankly speaking, the public purse has to do it largely. There's more philanthropic money and more charity money going in, but public purse dominates there, and always will, in my view. That's only possible if the economy is buoyant. So there is an absolute symbiosis between these things. They are not in competition, and I've never, ever thought of them as tensioned against one another. They have to be mutually symbiotic, and that is actually what I think the role of UKRI is, to bring those 3 equal legs into a symbiosis, into a reinforcing loop.
Thank you very much. Let's talk about each one of those in turn. I mean, first of all, the first bucket, discovery science. I've always been not quite so keen on the expression curiosity-driven, because curiosity-driven is a kind of statement of human motivation, and people have lots of different motivations for doing lots of different types of science, but it is the discovery science. QR is in there. Does that imply an assumption that universities left to their own devices will simply do curiosity-driven research, and that universities, when they have a pot of money over which they have a degree of control, won't use any of it for applied research or application and commercialization?
No, clearly it doesn't. So look, QR is clearly, I mean, those of you in the room that know this, QR obviously applies to all parts of our programme. For sure, it supports curiosity-driven, but it also supports driving growth, for sure, right? But in its nature of unrestricted, unhypothecated funding, we give that delineation of where do universities want to invest that to the university, right? We don't determine that. We simply say the outcomes that we're trying to achieve are our mission. You use this unrestricted, unhypothecated money in order to achieve that. We don't forensically audit how that is used, nor do I believe that we ought. I think that absolutely universities need to have, as a chief exec, God knows, I feel that I need to have some flex and some freedom to be able to operate the organisation, and those unrestricted funds are just essential to that efficient operation of an organisation and institute. So I don't want to interfere in any of that. The reason for putting it into bucket 1 is sort of twofold. You've got choices here. You could put it in any of the buckets, or you could slice it and dice it. And I don't believe this is the position of the existing government, but in order to protect that unrestricted funding into future governments, I think that slicing and dicing is a retrograde thing to do because it becomes easier to micro-cut different parts. If you put it in one place, it's visible, and then cutting one thing which is visible is you know, you can still do that as a government. Treasury can do whatever they like here, but they have to do so overtly, not covertly. So we wanted to make sure that you didn't get this gentle atrophy over time through slicing by hiding it and obfuscating it. And secondly, I wanted to raise the visibility of it. I wanted to be really clear with our government stakeholders and indeed with the sector that is an underpinning part of our investment, the UKRI's investment, government's investment into research and innovation. And that unrestricted, unhypothecated funding is a foundation. And I don't think we should sort of hide it or tuck it under the carpet. We should make it visible and say that is what makes us good as a country, is that we give people freedom. We give them an ability to follow emerging trends and to decide their priorities. If we pin everything down and effectively move away from a dual funding system and just say, well, we'll just do 100% contracts, then you lose that freedom. It's all contractual. So by making it visible and being clear that unrestricted is a big part of our investment, and it is a quarter of our budget, we are raising that visibility that I think had previously been a bit hidden.
And does that eloquent defence of the block element in QR, so really bucket one, and given that you recognise, and you make very powerful arguments against trying to slice it and dice it, but you recognise it does not just do discovery. In a way, bucket one is discovery, science, and QR funding.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Then there's
which, by the way, means something to the sector, means nothing to the general public. So let's make it simple.
Yeah, and there is a wider issue which you might come to about communication, but within the community, discovery and QR is a. I realise these are linguistic subtleties, but what's significant about it is that it's unhypothecated and it's available for universities to use in a range of different ways, which need not necessarily be discovery.
Correct.
Bucket two is obviously very significant, and the industrial strategy. I mean, it's by the time you look at the 8 different pillars of the industrial strategy, you've covered a hell of a lot of activity.
Yeah.
And so the tough decisions that you inevitably have at UKRI, and I remember from my years serving on the board of UKRI, when you get into specific decisions, such as in my day, the Industrial Strategy Challenge Funds, when you decide how to spend the money, as you decide how to spend the money in that second industrial strategy bucket, how are you going to consult the sector? How are those type of decisions going to be taken? Because in reality, there are a host of really important granular decisions there. How are you going to take them? How are you going to prioritise?
Yeah. So I suppose there's a few things I'd like to say about this. Firstly, we don't see it as competition between sectors, right? So many of you will have heard me say, I want us to be more deliberate and to do fewer things, to do them at critical mass, and to make a genuine impact on our economy, to have a clear role for the UK in an international market, which is where we operate. There's no good selling to ourselves, right? We're 1% of a global market. If we just sell to ourselves, we're not going to grow the economy. We have to export, we have to sell. And why do we have the right to win in a global market? So we have to identify the things that we are genuinely competitive at, and then build on them, not try to do everything. We are a medium-sized economy. We cannot do everything. So I do want focus, but when I say that, it does not mean that I want to focus on one sector to the what's the word I'm looking for? To the exclusion, thank you, of all the others. It means that within a sector, so let's say within the clean energy sector, what specifically is the UK targeting? And then even if you look at the industrial strategy, and within clean energy, it talks about wind, it talks about fusion, fission, carbon capture. what in wind, right? What actually is the UK going to export in that market? Is it rotors? Is it blades? Is it floating platforms? Is it substations? Is it connections underwater? Is it maintenance? What is it? Where is the return? What part of the sector are we actually targeting? And I don't believe that we should just make distributed investments where we put a few million into everything. Not at that stage. In curiosity driven and in discovery science, I totally buy that, right? So you want to plant lots of seeds. But once you've got some saplings growing, then the ones that look healthy, you nurture. And then once they turn into trees, you actually take the fruit down, right? And you make something out of it. It's no good just having a field of saplings. That does not make you any money. So we do have to be more deliberate in our choices as within a sector.
And it's interesting the way our conversation has already gone, which is where do disciplines fit into this, and where do research councils, as where disciplines have a body that kind of has some role in sustaining them? They're going to grow, they'll grow and shrink, and the shape of the discipline will change. But is it possible that in the kind of model we are talking about, the perspective of the health of an individual discipline and how it's changed, that perspective gets lost? How do you ensure that perspective is part of your deliberations at UKRI?
Yeah, so firstly, on bucket one, that will continue to be distributed by discipline, right? So we'll continue to run through the research councils, and the research councils absolutely do have within their remit the health of their sector and making sure that we're providing the skills for the future and that we have making the right interventions to keep the sectors healthy. That is, and by the way, all the executive chairs are passionate about that, right? So it's in their DNA. It's something that I couldn't take off them if I wanted to, right? It's absolutely who they are. And long may that continue. That's an absolutely necessary part of our role. At the same time, the bucket two, so if I take, I could take any of the sectors, but let's take AI. AI is not just engineering and physical sciences, right? It's pretty much all of the disciplines have to be involved in delivering the AI industrial strategy. And I really do mean all of them, including ESRC and AHRC. To do that well, you have to involve all of the disciplines. So it becomes an interdisciplinary thing. And that actually is what I think the UK is sort of uniquely good at. If you look at how we use our money, we put, roughly speaking, of the public spending in R&D, 3/4, 80% goes into universities. And universities are, by their nature, multidisciplinary institutions. That is anomalous compared to most of our peers, right? The US, Japan, Germany, they will put half the money into single-purpose institutions and half the money into multi-purpose institutions. We're very heavily skewed towards multi-purpose institutions for historical reasons, right? My old organisation was a single-purpose organisation. There are not very many of those in the country, comparatively. Yep. And so that is a strength for the UK. That is something that we are uniquely characterised well to do the multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary research. So let's play to that strength. Let's look for convergent research. Let's set up our industrial strategy such that we are not talking about an industrial strategy which is just in a silo, but we are deliberately looking for convergence of research, because that's a thing that we can do really well that other countries are less well set up to do.
So that is a ringing defence of what, as you rightly say, puts Britain at towards one end of the spectrum, with an unusually high proportion of the research funding going into universities. Of course, the UKRI was created after Paul Nurse's first report, and his second report was about public sector research establishments. And I have long argued that actually the public sector has sadly proved to be not always a good custodian and protector of those, though the AEA, you were fantastic at delivering and growing the AEA. So once you accept that through path dependency and other reasons we have this extraordinary asset, we know Patrick Vallance and others are very interested in the idea of whether you can categorize universities, where you can identify different divisions of universities, whether you can say some universities are to be research intensive and others not. In reality, I think your UKRI funding is already quite heavily weighted towards a relatively small number of research intensives.
Yeah.
Do you worry about the health of the higher education system? Do you think there are arguments for greater focus in your funding of universities? And do you worry about university kind of specialization by accident? Do you worry about finding that, whereas in the old days when we had HEFGE, one of the functions of HEFGE was to say, hang on, so quite a few chemistry departments are closing, why is this happening, should we step in? To what extent do you think UKRI has any responsibility for the distribution and maintenance of research activity across universities?
So I think our responsibility primarily as a public body is to the public. Right? We're spending the public's money. We're here to deliver outcomes for the public. We cannot deliver outcomes for the public of the whole country if we don't use all the muscles of the country and make sure that the economy is working and prosperous and buoyant in all parts of the country. So for sure we have a responsibility to make sure that we think carefully about the interventions that we make around the country to make sure that all places prosper and all places succeed. But that does not equate to the same as doing everything in all regions. So I think you can do both of those things at the same time. You can think about the health of a sector and the health of a place and also make choices. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Then the second part of your question about what is UKRI's role, we are a part of that system, right? When it was Bayes and skills and research were together, it was one department. It's now 2, maybe 3 departments. There's a bit in DWP, there's a bit in DFE, and there's a bit in DSIT. And then there's arm's length bodies like us and OFS, and we all have to work together. It has to be a whole state endeavour to make sure that the sector is healthy. We are not more or less responsible for that than the other actors in the system. And my last point on this is that we also shouldn't tell the universities what to do. They're independent institutions. We should be clear about what our strategy is and what outcomes we are trying to achieve for the public. But then it's up to them to decide how to act in that, and they can shape themselves in whichever way they wish. A free and open market will regularly go through mergers and acquisitions and change shape, and companies will change strategy to build on what their unique assets are and what their value proposition is. A sector is unhealthy if every company or institution in that sector all looks the same. If you have a monochrome sector, that's unhealthy, right? But we should not determine the strategy of the institutions. We should work hand in glove with them, and it should be a partnership, but we should not tell them what to do.
And of course, and we haven't talked yet about the third bucket, but there is often, paradoxically, you find that when it's really close to market application and commercialization, it's sometimes the less research-intensive universities that make a distinctive and strong contribution there, not least because their academic staff have less of a focus on the publications in the prestigious journals that push a university up the research rankings.
Yeah.
And as you see, tell us a little bit more about how you see the third bucket, which I guess we think of crudely as Innovate UK spend, how you see that working out and where that money goes. And when you say we don't want to spread it too thinly, again, the granular decisions that you're having to take about where that bucket of money is spent and how it's spent.
Yeah. Two things to say about that. So yes, you have this notion that money is Innovate UK. I would contend, and I think most of my executive team feel this, that historically Innovate has been treated as a vertical. So we have disciplinary structure to our organisation, all of the research councils, and then Innovate is a vertical, more or less doing independent things. And Tom, the executive chair at Innovate, and I have a very strong belief that it should be horizontal and it should be embedded in all of our programmes and working with all of our councils and completely tight-knit, hand-in-glove partnership work. To that extent, buckets 2 and 3 in our world actually are managed through one programme. So there are not separate programmes. We have nominally a ledger line for bucket 2 in quantum and a ledger line for bucket 3 in quantum, but they're managed under one RO, one program board, everybody together, and that team is federated of people from the councils and Innovate working as one team, one collective, not Innovate as a vertical over here doing separate things. And that's really important to me. I think that will be important in the successful delivery of these programs. The second is the shift in mindset that we're trying to undertake within Innovate, and this has not happened yet, but it is the direction that we're going through, is that previously we funded projects and programs where we would say we're going to make interventions in a topic, and then we would fund lots and lots and lots of companies in given topic. We're trying to shift the mindset. We'll do a little bit of that, but we're trying to shift the mindset to mainly we're investing in a company. So we do a higher due diligence up front, but then we offer a concierge service to that company and help them to develop, to grow, to think about their market, to think about their expansion, to raise money, to find customers. We actually help them on the journey to the point that we can step out because they don't need us anymore. But rather than, here's a grant, Heaviside step function, cliff edge, they apply for a new grant, they might win it, here's another grant, stop, cliff edge. It's now a concierge service. You meet your milestones, we keep working with you. We're with you, we're with you. It's a walk with journey rather than a sort of give you some money and walk off.
Yeah. And I might add, wearing my hat as chairing the Regulatory Innovation Office, one of the things that has shocked me, actually, and I've had this conversation with Tom running Innovate UK, is how many of the companies, the high-tech startup companies who come to us because they've got a serious regulatory barrier to getting their technology into the market, have already received Innovate UK funding. So Innovate UK has pushed them forward, but a different part of government, a regulator, has not helped. And I think, and one thing where I absolutely agree with what you say on the concierge service, and we in Rio try to help, is trying to ensure those conversations about potential regulatory barriers happen earlier, so that if there's a regulatory obstacle, we can tackle it. But equally, if there's a really uncomfortable message about a regulatory constraint that is unlikely to change, as they develop their technology and think of the market, they properly factor in from earlier on what the regulatory issue is. So I think, and if the investment team at DBT were with us, they would also say, and we want to think about, post-Mansion House Accords, lining up investors. So this concierge service is UKRI plus, isn't it? It's
Absolutely.
You working with other parts of government.
Absolutely.
And a bit of procurement would be handy as well.
Totally. And look, I've been in and around the Westminster system now for, 12 years or something. It feels more joined up and concerted now than it has ever done in my time. And I really do feel this is a whole of government approach,
Yes.
and you really do.
Yes.
I really do feel, it's not lip service, I do feel that all the departments are signed up behind a strategy, and it's not working yet, but you feel the willingness
Yep.
of your work on Rio all the way through to government procurement and how we use that as a lever, and more coherence than I've experienced in the past. And I think that is hugely enthusing and a really good sign for the country.
Yes.
Can I just say one other thing about the sort of the culture and the mindset of folk? I think a lot of the sector has historically seen UKRI as a distributor of money. And I think we have to be so much more than a distributor of money. We have to be a generator of value. And by value, I mean all parts, right? The advancing knowledge, the improving lives and driving growth. All of those equate to value. We cannot just give out money. We have to generate value for the public whose money I'm spending, right? And that is a really important mindset.
That links into something, and I'm just going to ask two more areas of questioning, and then we will open it up, because I mean, a lot of what you say, the importance of growth, the importance of value, is of course how the Treasury thinks. And there is, hanging over these debates, the crucial issue of securing funding, public funding, and the terms on which it's secured. And the Treasury will be, any negotiation on public expenditure on science and research with the Treasury involves showing what you're doing for growth. And it was in my day, when it was all integrated in a different way, universities and science and research, all part of my ministerial responsibility, you equally found that for the Treasury it was, for example, increasing the impact element in QR. Things like that were a precondition of getting a protected budget. So how are you getting on with the Treasury. And there is that wonderful, innocuous expression. It makes one think of putting kiddies to bed. There's tucking in. And the Treasury like that wonderfully soft expression, tucking in. It doesn't mean, sadly, reading a nighttime story to a toddler. It means another bit of spending somewhere else, be it EU horizon allocations or whatever, being put into your budget. How are your negotiations with the Treasury going, and what are the constraints that you're operating on?
I mean, I should judiciously not answer your question, shouldn't I? But I'm too willful for that. Look, my relationship with the Treasury is great. I mean, I really mean that.
Yeah.
I can say it very authentically that the officials are totally aligned with what we're trying to achieve. I said earlier, I feel a whole of government alignment between delivering on our mission, and the Treasury is no different in that regard. My line I have on this, and look, some of my staff also question me about the arm's length body nature of our relationship, and is the arm getting shorter? I don't like the phrase arm's length body personally. I describe ourselves as a partner organisation, and when you're in a partnership, you know, a marriage or any partnership that you might be in, the one person in the world who can say to you, that is a bloody stupid idea, don't do it, is your partner. And you listen to them, right? More than anybody else. And that is how I feel our relationship with DSIT and with the Treasury should be. It should be a genuine partnership. They absolutely should be able to make requests of us. They should be able to ask us to do specific things. And we should be able to say to them, that's bloody stupid, don't do that. And that is when you know you've got a really good working relationship, is when it works like that.
Very interesting. Finally, before we open it up, just kind of wider changes in the way that we do science, and obviously the rise of AI is a key factor in that. There is a nightmare scenario for you at UKRI where research grant applications and decisions go the way of the jobs market, with the mass production of research grant applications using AI, and then another AI process sitting somewhere in UKRI reaching the decisions, which is where AI seems to have had a real impact. Sadly, so far it looks not a helpful one on the recruitment market. So there's the arrival of AI in that form. There's also the argument that our asset is our data, and in particular, our research data, and research data that, you know, distributed around in notebooks, and including some of it where the evidence ends up with a negative result rather than a positive result, not necessarily leading to any kind of publication. I always say to my friends in science, the difference between science and politics is in politics, we operate in a media environment which is a permanent journal of negative results. It's when things don't work that it gets reported. You don't realise how lucky you are in science that it's a journal of positive results, where it's the things that work, it's the significant findings that get reported. However, that ironically does have a cost. There's a lot of data when you've reached a negative finding that's not been released. So where you are on AI, to what extent it's going to change grant processes, and the extent to which you think within the corpus of the research ecosystem that you at UKRI are so involved with, there is a lot of incredibly valuable data that somehow, hopefully under some kind of British control, can be analysed.
Yeah. Again, two parts to that question. So on AI, look, it is already transforming our world, because grant application volumes are going up and up and up, and therefore win rates are going down and down and down. And that is a monumental poor use of bright people's time. I tried to exemplify this by saying that last year UKRI processed over 30,000 grant applications for investment, and now probably it's easier and quicker to write the grant application, but if you add up the time of the PI, the co-Is reviewing it, the research office in the university, the department reviewing it, then the 6 peer reviewers to whom it went, then the panel and my staff, I reckon each one of those is conservatively a third of a person year. If you dealt with 30,000 of them, you've spent 10,000 people years of some of the brightest minds in the country in running an application process. It does not feel like a good use of 10,000 bright people, to be honest. So as a country, we have got to get out of this treadmill system. And that is not just us. It is all of the participants in this. You know, academic reward, career pathways are determined a bit by this. Everybody feels they need to be on a grant. Why can't we go to bigger grants with more people on them? You know, we've got to collectively change our approach to this. It's not just about UKRI, it's doing it together in partnership. And indeed, it would crash if we sit in a room on our own and determine the right thing to do. We absolutely have to do that with the sector, and that is absolutely our intent. But this is not a good use of people's time, so we have to change our modality. Notwithstanding the fact that the rise of AI makes it. I was at London Tech Week, whenever it was last week, and I saw a bunch of companies showing their wares, saying, "Come buy our software, and we'll help use AI to write your grants and write your proposals for procurement." And I mean, very very openly doing that, and they had a steady stream of business, right? So it's like hidden in plain sight, folks. It makes no sense for us to be like King Canute trying to push back the tide. This is our world. We have to adapt to it. And we can't say peer review is going to look like it did 30 years ago, because the world is different. So we have to adapt. Again, we shouldn't adapt in isolation. We have to work that through with the sector, and that is a process we are now beginning. But things will change. They have to change. On data, actually, that is one of the great values of UKRI. I mean, I think people forget. They think of us as a funder and a grant giver. But we also have over 6,000 researchers inside the organisation, right? That's like Oxford or Cambridge in terms of researcher dimension. We have nearly 750,000 square metres of real estate and campus. You know, these are real assets, and because of that, we run a large number of infrastructures and facilities which generate data. Again, hugely undervalued and untapped. I know from running my institution that I used to, the data we collected, we used a small fraction of, and I mean 1%, 2%, 3%, right? A really small fraction thereof. And that is an amazing asset and hugely valuable. And the tools that now exist that didn't even 5 years ago can actually mine that asset. So there's huge potential for us to use our data and to join it up. If you're looking at whole systems things like climate, you know, the data that the Antarctic Survey holds and the data that the Geological Survey holds, hugely value when added together, right? So the conjoining of data, the convergence of the different data sets, which previously hitherto just couldn't be tapped, now can be tapped. So I'm hugely excited about that opportunity.
And do you see any systematic initiatives to do that? I mean, is there a...
There needs to be. So baby steps on that at the moment.
Well, that was really interesting, and thank you so much, Ian. And now let's broaden this out. First, questions here from our audience, and then in a moment I'll also look at the online questions. And do go to if you're participating online, do go to Slido and also upvote questions, which helps me identify the ones that get most of greatest interest. Right, so let's see. I see a bunch of hands up there. Give your name and organisation, please, there, and then pass it on to the second person. Yep.
Hi, Melissa Uchida, Particle Physics. We've met before. Hello again. And I think today we've heard a load of really exciting things, and I think there's a lot of great opportunity here, which is really exciting. And you say in particular about the fact that there's no point having a sea of saplings because you can't get any value from them, and that's a great analogy. But I'm afraid, with all the good things, I do have to bring us back to some of the difficulties, some of the challenges we're facing. So how do you justify, given making that statement, a reprioritization exercise which will basically waste billions to save millions? We are in a situation now, whoever's fault, whatever happened, as processes change, as we evolve, as we make things better, we do have to also work with what's gone before. And that money has been poured into these infrastructure projects, which now if we tension them against the researchers to use them, we lose undoubtedly the value that they are now able to create. As you say, the data which hasn't up to now been used. And it's that data that provides us with these technological advances that actually benefit the GDP. So right now, we've spent a lot of money on these infrastructure projects, these large things. We've spent a lot of money on setting up these research programs for the sake of 162 million, how are we now going to justify saying, well, we can either have the thing or we can have the people that use the thing? Let's generate some value from what we've created.
Yeah. Well,
yes, let's go straight. Yeah, let's do the particle physics. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, I agree with your thesis that we should use the assets that we've got as best we can. And to try to get to the heart of your question on STFC, I think most of the people in the room know I'm not going to rehearse that we have a cost pressure to deal with there. And we have to deal with it. We have to take management decisions to deal with that. We have been going through a careful assessment process. I think quite rightly, you and indeed many others in the community challenge me on, well, have you assessed the impact before you make decisions? Well, that's what we're doing. So we announced the cost pressure before. How are you doing that, please? In the very many ways that you know about. So we've done... We don't know about how the impact assessment is done. The Science Board, PPAN, has said that they are not doing... Thank you. Sorry. The PPAN Science Board has said that they are not doing an impact assessment. They are doing a prioritisation exercise. So I think we need real clarity, please, from UKRI and STFC on how that impact assessment is being done.
And let's just see, is there anyone, because there is a particle physics issue.
Physics,
I want to do sort of particle physics now and then move on. Is that, was your question a particle? Right. I think, okay, let's, Ian.
Just the two?
Was yours a particle physics question? Right, we'll do that, and then we'll do particle physics.
I'm afraid it's been covered already. So you spoke a lot about, value, and I respect that, but I'm a particle theorist, and my students and my postdocs, very often they go into finance, they go into AI, they go into quantum. Good. They've got tremendous amounts of training. If you want to do a classification problem in a multidimensional parameter space in AI, it helps if you've done general relativity, that's for sure. Yeah. Right. My question for you is the current reduce in the number of early career researchers in these areas. Has there been an assessment of the effect on the UK economy of the reduction in the training for those people?
Yeah. So there's probably lots of parts there. So I'll come back to training and let me just explain how we're doing it. So we announced cost pressure. We're taking advice from umpteen sources. We've done a whole load of community engagement. Hopefully you've come to many of those community events we've been hosting all around the country, including a big webinar which we did with thousands of people online. We've asked all of the participants in all of the grants to give us input on what would happen in different scenarios. We've synthesized all of that input, taken it to our science boards and our advisory councils. That then went to the STFC council week before last, I think, and then came up to our executive committee recently, and it goes to our board on the 1st of July, I think, at which point we'll then be able to put that up to ministers for the direction forward. In terms of the impact assessment, that is, of course, being done by the STFC officials who are working hard to synthesize the input that is taken from the community to then do an impartial impact assessment against that input. All of which is the right thing to do. So it would have been wrong for us to make any snap decisions. It also would be wrong for us to take many years to make these decisions because we will just make the cost pressure worse and we will spend money that we don't have. So we have to deal with it, we have to grip it, but we also need to take the right amount of time to get the right input to be able to make good evidential decisions. That is the process you should expect us to follow, and that is what we're doing, trying to do this in the most evidenced and rational way, which is how we should behave as scientists, with evidence and ration. On the question about training and how we're supporting the next generation, well, we deliberately put more money into training than pretty much any other line. So the UKRI budget goes up about 8% overall across the piece, but we put preferentially more money into the skills and training effort, so that goes up about 13%, I think, across the 4 years. We guarantee that we'll be able to train the same number of PhD students, the same number of starts of PhD students every year across that period, assuming inflation doesn't go completely crazy over 4 years. Because it's super important, and I fundamentally believe that's one of the most important things that UKRI does. So we continue to support that. The fact of the matter is that we have got a fabulous settlement here. We do have a fabulous settlement in a constrained fiscal environment. For there to be more money in research and innovation is a great outcome, and that is not true for many spending departments across the government. We do have an uplift, but the costs per head in universities are going up greater than my uplift, and therefore the number of people that we're training in postdocs is typically going down. And that is because cost escalation in the sector. We do have to do some right sizing. We have to get on top of our overheads. This is not just a UKRI issue. This is the whole of the sector has to grip this issue and accept that overheads cannot just continue to rise. We do have to control our costs. We have to make tough choices. And many universities are absolutely doing that, and we are doing that internally as well ourselves. It's the right things to do.
I think now there are, I'm looking at the questions that have been upvoted, and I think we should move on to what's coming online, because there's one question that has been upvoted clearly ahead of all the others, and it's something that we hadn't really covered. The government announced more devolved powers to mayors on R&D and innovation funding. What is UKRI's strategy for regions and clusters?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we started about 12 months ago a programme called the Local Innovation Partnership Fund. I should take a step back. Let me take a step back. UKRI has and before my time, but really does care about investing in all parts of the country. And you can see that through the change in where our budget has gone. So last year we invested 20% of our budget, for instance, in the north of England. The whole of Whitehall spending is about 12% of the whole of Whitehall goes to the north of England, and UKRI was about 20%. And that has increased year on year on year over the last 5 years, last spending review period. So concertedly, UKRI cares about this and has been trying to make sure we use all parts of the country and all of our muscles to lift a heavy weight. But I don't think that all the places have felt that benefit yet. And in large part, I think that is because we have not done a sort of concerted co-creation with places. We've done a tactical distribution where we open up competitions and everybody bids against everything, really. And so everybody gets a small amount from each competition, and they don't feel a critical mass and an aggregation and a clustering effect. And we know time and time again that by clustering, you really then see inward investment come behind because you've got a critical mass. So we started about a year ago a programme called the Local Innovation Partnership Fund, £500 million fund, which was to co-create with places. So rather than running a competition against which they could all bid, we earmarked money for places and then said, now let's co-create that programme with you of the interventions where you think you've got real strengths. How do we make interventions to build on those strengths in that place and aggregate and cluster things in any given topic? And I don't mean life sciences, I mean be specific within life sciences. And so we've been going through that process over the last 12 months. The first few of those have now been announced, the scope of what's being run in those programs, and a few still going through process. But because of the success of that program, government have decided that we now have these strong co-created relationships with particularly established mayoral strategic authorities and some city regions in devolved nations. And so from the next spending review, they're going to devolve that money through the integrated settlements directly to the places. UKRI still work in partnership with them, but they take accountability rather than I holding accountability for it. And we can absolutely see this as a partnership. I described partnership before, that we should be able to hold places to account, and we should be able to say, hang on a minute, you're not the best at that. Mm-hmm. But equally, they should be able to control their destiny. So that's how it will work from the next spending review, and we have the next 3 years to make sure that the framework is all right, and we have clear decision making and a sort of earned autonomy of how we pass that money across, and we build capability and capacity in those regions to be able to make best value out of that investment.
And that reminds me, how you talked about those type of co-creation partnerships. Of course, there are other Whitehall departments, and the part of UKRI's ambition has always been that a department with an R&D budget, and if anything, there's been a modest shift of total public sector R&D spend towards departments' own R&D budgets after a bad patch when they were being cut. But when the Department for Education had some research funding that it wanted to spend on social mobility, the obvious thing to do is to turn to the ESRC. Yep. If you're in the DCMS and you want to do some research, the obvious thing is to turn to the AHRC and you to be a trusted partner also to help deliver R&D for departments. How is that agenda shaping up?
Yeah, so we still do that. In fact, our managed programme portfolio is a bit over 4 billion. So on top of our 38.6 billion settlement over the next 4 years. We then have managed programs which are a bit over 4 billion, where a department will say, this is the outcome we're trying to achieve, please achieve it for us. And we then run the program for them, because it makes no sense for them to stand up a capability which already exists in the public sector. Let's not duplicate. I think that is a discussion for us to have with places, because places may well also say, okay, well, we'll have the devolution of the budget, but we can use muscles that already exist in the public sector rather than recreating multiple times across the country. But they should own the outcomes, right? They should own the accountability for the outcomes.
Right, let's collect some more questions from here. Let's start down at the front, because we must hear... Not quite very well. We'll come to you in a moment, Jane. Right, yes. I'm going to try to collect several questions. Okay. 1, 2, yes, we'll start there. That's very fine. Go for it. Name
so,
and
Marika Taylor
organisation.
from the University of Birmingham, also EPSRC Council and MOD Advisory Board, and you'll see the context of the question. So, the question is around research infrastructure and about the funding and governance of that, particularly in the defence and security context, particularly in the geopolitical situation we're in. How would you talked about relationships being closer than they've been, and I would certainly concur with that. But when it comes to sort of the complexities of running infrastructure, which is dual usage, and thinking about, not just the funding of it, but actually the governance, how could you see that could be evolved going forwards?
Right, I'm going to collect a couple more. Right, so we've got a dual use question. Gentleman here. Yep.
Hi there. Hello again. Ian, John Sidorn from the National Oceanography Centre. I'm also on the steering committee of the National Research Organisations Group. So I'm really trying to decode your question about specialism versus breadth of capability, and particularly around clustering. One of the things that's very clear in this country is we spend far less on institutions and specialist organisations than other countries often do. You talked at the beginning about having QR funding and the importance of having the headroom. Right now, it's becoming harder and harder for institutions to stay afloat, at least in many areas, because that sort of funding is going down, and it's becoming harder to operate in that sort of environment. It'd be great to hear your views, because you haven't spoken much about that, and you have a background, of course, in that area. Yeah. It'd be great to hear your views on that and where you see the future of institutes.
Thank you. And then pass forward. Yep.
Hi there, Jane Gate from Airto. I wonder if you could say a little bit about your vision for international collaboration, and I'm thinking particularly about how we maximise the UK's position in Framework 10 and the work that we need to do, collaboratively right across the piece, to be able to compete like some of the other non-member states, like Norway and Switzerland. And I think it would be really interesting just to understand what you see as UKRI's role in that.
Yep. 3 rather different questions.
Okay.
Go for it.
Oh God, there was a third.
Dual use.
There was something. No. I've written it all down. I just had a thing that I wanted to put on. I've got it. Right. Sorry. Process slowly, as you can see. So the first one on infrastructure for dual use. Yeah, I mean, I think these things are soluble, but you do have to do that deliberately from the start. And if you try to retrofit it, that's when it becomes really complicated. It's why we've gone out of our way to, when we set up the programme boards, make sure that we have the right voices on them. So, for instance, on the quantum board, we will have people from the security forces on there, and obviously on defence and EngBio and things where there's obvious dual use. We're bringing them in right at the start before we then start heading down a pathway and try and retrofit it at the back end. So I do think these are soluble. Maybe we should have a conversation about any specifics afterwards, but I do think that's soluble. John, your question about specialism versus breadth. I should try to be really, really clear about this. So on the multidisciplinary organisations, yes, I'm calling for specialism because I don't think everybody can be an all things to all people or institution. The sector just can't sustain all organisations looking like that. I don't think we want mono behaviour. But that doesn't mean I want a load of universities to close physics or close chemistry. It means within chemistry and within physics, what is your specialism? What are you uniquely good at compared to the other 160 research performing universities in the country? So being clear about what you're really good at. For institutions, single-purpose institutes, look, obviously I care deeply about those institutions, having been brought up in one. I really do think that they also need flex and freedom and flexibility. Now, that sort of depends on your main sponsorship route. If it's through us and we give you unrestricted funding, then we have to have the right governance in place to do that. I can't just sort of ship money and have no control. So we have to have the right governance. If it's through a department, then the department, I used to be through DESNES, and we did have an ability to flex, but that was because DESNES sat on our board and were really deeply embedded in us as an organisation. So you need the right governance in place. And the other thing is that you should be doing some commercial work, right? Those institutions, not exclusively, but in large part are doing some applied work and some commercial work. And you should be doing some commercial work, and we should be able to give you the freedoms to hold that commercial work, to give you freedom to invest that margin into whatever you want, frankly. And that was certainly the case in my old gig. Where we used to make money, we could then reinvest it into wherever we wanted to, and we should provide you with the freedoms and the support in doing that, absolutely. And then, Jane, your question on international collaboration, 3 parts to that. So, look, we can't solve all of society's problems on our own. We absolutely have to be embedded internationally. I suppose, much like my thesis around having a clarity of thought for an industrial sector, I feel the same about our relationships with key international partners. What do we want from that relationship? Have almost a country plan for that relationship, rather than it all being bottom-up slightly. I know that the best researcher in my field happens to be in Switzerland, so I'll do a thing with them. But what does the nation want? So thinking about the holistic, I think we should have country plans. I think that historically we have thought a lot about the advancing knowledge relationships that we have with other states, and almost nothing about the driving growth. But as I said before, if we're selling to ourselves, we ain't driving growth. So we have to be thinking about our place and our, UK companies' place in an international market. And I think we should be putting just as much effort into a reciprocal relationship, which is, well, we'll do this research thing with you, but we want this access to your market, right? How do we use our assets to be able to leverage market access for our companies? How do we then generate returns for our companies? And I think we underestimate our heft, right? So how do we use that heft? We spend 10 billion of public money every year. It's heft, size, scale. Use it in negotiation. FP10, you should ask DSIT. They own that policy choice, not me. But what I will say is that I think for sure we have to maximise our return from current Horizon Europe. We last year left money on the table, and we have to be demonstrating that things are going in the right direction and that we're getting more and more and more value from it year on year on year, which requires effort, requires concerted effort. It won't just happen, requires people to engage and put effort into it. And we have a role in that, but lots of people in this room have a role in that, and we're not on our own.
Do you want to? I see George Freeman putting his hand out, having been involved in the negotiation. Is that what you? And well, no, because actually, I was going to ask. I thought we might stay with that for 2 more minutes, and because I'd be interested to know a little bit more. You say country plans, yep. Which are you talking Japan? Are you talking Germany? Have you got some examples?
You know, I'm not going to answer that question, do you?
What these country plans might be, and also there are hard men in the Treasury who will say, look, are we absolutely sure that putting all this money into the EU has worked for us as well as we would have hoped? Are we sure that we want to stick with that high-cost budget decision? But George, if you want to come in on that as well.
Yeah, thanks, David. That was exactly what I wanted to pick up. I observe a number of things since in 21, Rishi Sunak as Chancellor and I secured the raise to 20 billion. First I observe is Treasury is still only at 17. Very slow to put the money through. But the 2 big changes I observe in the system and internationally, the AI piece, I think David's question, completely fascinating. I think it totally changes the way we traditionally distribute money, even more radically, but that's another. And the other is the geopolitics. So we now have a president in America, and I think it's true that there's a big State Department shift. They've gone for hemispheric influence, attacking NATO, saying they want Greenland, and Europe's got to look after itself. And as trade envoy, I've come back to support the programme. In the Gulf, I see phenomenal investments in Formula One healthcare, in the next generation of energy systems, and in Southeast Asia, where I'm envoy, the same. When I came back to ask Ottoline, what is the international? agenda for UKRI? What does it have a house view on the global race? She said, no, that's not our job. I think you have gripped it, and I'm really interested. I went straight to Japan, Israel, and Switzerland to sign S&T agreements, as well as getting us back into Horizon. But it seems to me, in this global race, UKRI has to be the kind of the global monitor of who's investing what where, and where do we deploy our money well. And I'd be really interested to hear your view of what country plans, what the geopolitical plan looks like to make sure we're an influence in, as Mark Carney would put it, an influential second power in this new global landscape.
Yes, and while we're on this international thing, let me add an online question in this theme. Are you worried about what's happening to science in the US, such as the OMB directive, and any effect it might have on UK science? I mean, is it an opportunity? Is it a problem? So a bit more on the international thing.
Yeah, okay, so there was a lot in that. Horizon value to start with. Look, I'm fundamentally European. I ran the largest piece of European infrastructure in the UK for many, many years, and worked for Eurofusion for a few years, which is a big European consortium. I feel I am European, right? And I know the value that what we get from international relationships is intangible in many ways, but huge. So I absolutely acknowledge that. At the same time, as I described earlier, I do think one has to be clear-eyed and cold-hearted about it, and make sure that we are maximising the value of public investment, and that there is an incumbence on us as a sector, right? We fought collectively to be part of Horizon because we made the argument that added great value to us and our ability to deliver against massive challenges for society. We have to demonstrate it. We have to demonstrate it. So I do think there is just a straight evaluation part of that. George, you were talking about AI and the application of that to our distribution of investment. I think it's broader than AI actually, and you know, to Ottoline and especially Stian's great credit. The UK is really at the forefront of the meta-science effort, and many other people around government as well. In DCIT and Number 10 were prescient on this. And indeed, the rest of the world is sort of looking to us and copying us on what we're doing on meta-science. And we are running a whole load of experiments through the course of this year as to not just whether we use sort of an AI augmented with human in the loop approach to assessment, but a range of different interventions that we might take into assessment process. And we're largely doing that in control. So we run the process as it has always been run and do a control alongside it and see what difference does it make and does it speed things up, but you get roughly the same quality answer. And so we are doing experiments, which is what we should do, right? We are scientists after all, to see whether we can adopt that to minimize the friction and bureaucracy in the system. So I agree with you. I think it could be revolutionary. On the which partners, I mean, needless to say, I'm not going to say which countries are the most important, nor should we do that in isolation again. I come back to my line that we're not just about giving out money, we are about generating value. How do we get value from our partnerships? And be clear-eyed about that, about, well, okay, if we have a country-to-country relationship with country X, is it a sort of bottom-up, allow good things to happen because bright people work better together? Or is it the layer above that where you say, well, we'll put this money in and you put this money in, and we do sort of programs alongside one another where we do a bit of sharing of the output, but we really own the IP and we have control? Or is it the layer above where we say, we just can't do this on our own and you can't do it on your own, so we'll both put money in and do a thing together and we'll co-own that? And it can be any of those strata, but we should do it determinedly. We should be able to say that is what we're trying to achieve with that country. And I don't think we've necessarily got that clarity at the moment, and that's what I'm trying to drive us towards. Coupled with what I said earlier about, well, how do we use that to get access to markets? Because ultimately, that is a big lever in our armory, and we should use it as much as we can and drive inward investment. And then the last question about science in the US, like I don't even talk about UK politics, let alone US politics. It's certainly not my place. But for sure, there is amazing talent in the US, and they are the largest economy in the world. It would be crazy for us not to be deeply embedded and supporting our partners through difficult times in that country. And I think we should, one of the things that I saw through Brexit was that our European partners in science supported us. And when countries go through change and they go through perturbations, that's when partnerships really matter more than anything to them. And so when there is a perturbation and a period of change in the US fiscal situation for science, we should support our partners. I don't worry about it ultimately, because any high growth economy is an innovation economy, and so I think ultimately by hook or by crook there will end up being support for it, and it will, the US science space will come out of this period of uncertainty, but we should help them and support them as much as we can in that period.
Good, thank you. Now let's collect some more interventions. I see, yes, there's a gentleman there with his, right by you, yep, there, and then the lady there, and then across, yep.
Thanks, David. Good evening. Paul Howarth, I'm president of the Institute of Physics. Ian and I have worked together for many years in the past in different roles. We now find ourselves in different roles now. Ian, I've got a question regarding your perspective on the totality of the ecosystem and the joined-up nature of government that you said you see it now in terms of where it's up to. And it's also really just an observation in terms of where we are as a country regarding this ecosystem, because I've just got sort of a bit of an itch around some of these fundamental capabilities. From a physics point of view, what you're looking at doing in terms of the prioritization, moving into areas that supports the economy, absolutely get it. And it's absolutely the right thing for the UK to be doing. And from physics, if we look at some of those areas, so whether it's into AI, quantum technologies, autonomous systems, robotics, absolutely the right thing to do, great for physics. I guess the consequence in terms of the prioritization, and we've touched on it a little bit this evening, is potentially what happens if that reprioritization impacts negatively some of the other disciplines in physics, the so-called area of particle physics, astronomy, nuclear, etc. And it's really, how do we as a country look at the totality of that ecosystem to make sure that we are protecting it and we're balancing it where appropriate? Because as that reprioritization happens, what we don't want is the tide going out in some of the other areas, and specifically some of those areas, as far as physics goes, you know, it does attract young people into the subject at the end of the day. That's number one. There is a lot of technology and spin out that happens, whether it's data acquisition, fast electronics, high energy systems, that applies across the UK, and a lot of the infrastructure supports, you know, medical in terms of accelerator technology as well. And a lot of it is high energy and complex engineering that supports the whole of the industry. Yeah. So how do we make sure that some of the consequences of looking at the reprioritization and balancing the portfolio doesn't have unintended consequences that potentially threaten some of the fundamental disciplines like physics?
All right, and I think, yes, the lady there, and then we'll go across the gentleman there. Yep.
Patricia Thornley, Chief Scientific Advisor to the Department for Transport. So I get that we want to prioritise. I agree with where you're heading on that. From my perspective, if your approach of concierge turns out to be, you know, the right strategy for growing these companies, I'm particularly interested in the companies in the AI and the quantum space applied to transport. What can I expect to see change by when, if the strategy is successful?
Right, yes, and across the aisle, yep.
Jim Lynch, University of Surrey. You mentioned the concept of interdisciplinarity, which is great. One of the things we had just a couple of weeks ago was the Pope issued his pronouncement, his encyclical on AI and what its potential was. And there's a couple of features which come out of that, which I think is terribly important, that there's a real danger. I was at a meeting last week with Cardinal Timothy Radcliffe, who's actually a good Oxford academic, and he said, and he was contributor to that, and he said one of the big dangers at the moment with AI is we will lose the face-to-face contact. And of course there's the whole ethical implications, that's what the Pope was saying, but it's face-to-face contact. If we're not careful, we need to continue to drive in an AI world.
And can I just add, actually, because Professor Thornley's question from the Department of Transport does tie in with one of the upvoted online questions, which I'd just like to throw into the mix. How should evaluation frameworks evolve to measure success in UKRI's mission of advancing knowledge, improving lives, and driving growth across different timescales?
Can you ask me that again, sorry, David?
Well, it's the what is your evaluation framework to measure success in delivering your missions as you have described them? Yeah. So we've got 3 different questions there. Yeah. Over to you.
Okay. Right, so Paul, to your question, it's a really good question, and let me be super clear that when I talk about prioritisation, it is not to take money out of discovery research to denude that in order to invest in government priorities. That's not happening. The discovery research is growing. We're not taking money out of it. The discovery research budget is growing. The applicant-led budget, so what people would have known historically as responsive mode, is growing. There is more money in all of those things. The prioritisation I talk about is not to take from bucket 1 and put into bucket 2. It's within bucket 2 to be really clear about what we're trying to achieve in any given sector. So I'm not taking away from discovery to put into application. It's within application to be really deliberate about where does the UK have a right to win and where can we get a chokehold or a dominant position in a sector. And that for sure is not all parts of a sector, right? It isn't. We're not a big enough economy. So we have to be deliberate in that part. So hopefully that answers your question on that. The question about what will change within Innovate UK, and it will be over the course of this year, actually. So you'll begin to see output this year. I hope by the autumn, companies already are beginning to feel benefit. So probably we will end up doing more diligence up front and asking more questions and actually engaging with founders and engaging with the team, which previously it was all sort of done on paper. But then once we've made a commitment to a company, we are invested in the company and not invested in a bunch of projects, right? So we are more of a partner to them. So they shouldn't feel cliff edges. As I say, we give you a grant for 12 months and then you have no more funding and then you have to come bid into another competition and you might have some more money and it might last for 18 months or something, but lots of cliff edges. It's a really hard way for a small early stage company to live hand to mouth like that. So a much clearer pipelining of saying, well, look, if in this 12 months we give you this money to do these things. If you do these things, then there's follow-on. And so there's commitment from our side. There's more surety for the company, which really should help them raise, because they know if they meet the milestones that it unlocks. And the second big thing that I really want us to do as an organisation is we're roughly speaking, we invest half of the research and innovation budget of the country, roughly speaking, right? We are pretty much the only organisation in the country that has the view of the assets that are generated from that investment, and indeed the assets generated from the investment of the departments and ARIA and other bits of the family. We have eyes on all of that, really. And I want us to get to the ability of being able to do proper portfolio management against that. So we see this portfolio and we can say to investors, this is what is generated by the UK's research and innovation budget, which everybody thinks is great, right? You go and talk to investors in Southeast Asia or the Middle East, they will tell you, we know that you're great at research, but where is our opportunity? Where can we invest? And at the moment, we sort of give rise to hundreds, if not thousands, of companies every year, and they're all on their own, and they all go talk to venture capitalists and sovereign wealth funds and pension funds, and they're all trying to raise on their own. Whereas if we could say, here's the portfolio, and of this portfolio, this is the bit that is properly internationally differentiated. This is the bit that is world-class and better than anybody else in the field. And of that, this is the bit that is also high growth potential. That is such an investable proposition, right? If we can identify that in our portfolio, and that is what I want Innovate UK and UKRI to be able to do, to be able to say, these are the best bits of research that the UK has produced, and these are the best companies that we've produced, and to help back them, because then money flows, and it's a rising tide that helps us all. So I hope that you begin to see shoots of that this year. AI and a question about ethical implications. So we're deliberately setting up our AI program to include a whole part on ethics and AI security. And as I described earlier, I do not think that the AI program should be run by the Engineering and Physical Sciences Council, just because maybe they're the biggest participant. but it should have participants from all of our councils, and it absolutely must have arts and humanities and economics and social sciences, because these things will not be adopted without social sciences and without humanities involved in that. And tellingly, the executive chairs from both of those are on the programme board for AI, because we really believe that it has to be interdisciplinary, and you have to think about the adoption from the outset. No good trying to bolt it on, as we were talking about dual use earlier. And then the last question about evaluation metrics. I should throw this question to Dan, really, because he's in charge of it, and I see him sitting in the front row. So maybe you can get him a mic and he can answer the question. But the answer is, I think that historically we have looked at a part of our impact and a part of the value that we generate to the country. I think we will need to adapt our metrics to be able to assess against all parts of our mission. I don't really have a prejudice about how to do that, and I would let the experts in data evaluation come up with the right metrics.
Can I just go back to your answer to the question about you were explaining you have more strategic relationships with companies rather than once-off one-year grants. A key ally in all this, part of Patrick Valence's vision, which you were referring to earlier, is partnership with the British Business Bank, the National Wealth Fund, and of course under the new fiscal rules, their investments are assets, so there is no increase in net financial liabilities of government, and that's why the budgets for British Business Bank and National Wealth Fund have increased very significantly. How are those relationships growing, and how will we see the effect of a better partnership there?
Yeah. So, I described earlier that I genuinely feel a more cross-government approach to this, and this is an example of that. So, in the last 12 months, has been stood up a group called the Puffins, Public Finance Institutions, which is chaired by Jim O'Neill, second Perm Secretary of the Treasury, and the 6 big investors, of which we are one, meet now on a sort of monthly cadence, and the working relationships are improving all the time, because we just frankly spend more time and know what one another are doing. And pretty much all of us now have bilateral or trilateral relationships with that group of 6. And there are a bunch of things that we're working on, and I can't necessarily tell you about any of them yet, because they're not over the line. But we are really working much tighter partnership with the British Business Bank, and it's been great for us, and I hope it's been valuable to them too. But I really do feel much more partnership there. I slightly churlishly pointed out that the collective noun of Puffins is an ambiguity, so an ambiguity of Puffins. But yes, I think those relationships are much tighter than they have been in the past.
Good. Look out for the Resolution Foundation report on the Puffins, which we are writing at the moment. Will be out during July, because you're right, they're a very interesting and important group now. Right, let's collect some more questions, starting here with Paul Bate, and then I see a couple over. We'll take that group over by the windows. Start there. Yep.
Thank you, Paul Bate from University of Surrey, and previously Chief Executive of the UK Space Agency. Could we stay on the concierge service? The way you've described it sounds a lot like the way in which private investment houses also think about their portfolios. Are you going to go it alone, or will you be working in partnership with private money, and if so, to what extent?
Yep. Right. Now, there were some questions over that. Yes? Right.
Adam Webb from CPI. There seems to be a lot of alignment between the Catapult network and your kind of vision for growth, but they've been sort of not mentioned at all so far tonight. So I'm interested in your view on the Catapults and how you think they can best support the kind of Pillar 3 activities.
Yep. Very good. And do you want to pass the microphone forward? Yep.
Hannah Russell, British Science Association. You talked about accountability to the public. And I know that's something you feel really passionate about. We know from the Public Attitudes to Science survey published earlier this year that the public sort of broadly feel that science is an asset for society, a benefit for society, but there's growing ambivalence and uncertainty and a growing disconnect, particularly for some groups. And so I'd really love to get your views on how we can better embed and recognise engagement with the public as a core part of a thriving research and innovation system, and what your vision is for UKRI's role in that space.
Very good. 3 questions for you, Ian.
Yeah. Paul, concierge service. Look, it is the similar sort of approach that a venture capitalist might take. Obviously, we're playing in a different part of the role. I mean, we're not making equity investments, we're giving grants, so it's non-dilutive. And we're generally much earlier, higher risk. As I described earlier, Innovate going from this sort of vertical to a horizontal is so that the Innovate grant is almost before the founder has even started thinking about starting the company and going and raising money. So we should be really at early stage in the interventions where private capital won't play. Because if we're just displacing private capital, we're we really shouldn't be doing that. It's like the opposite of what we should be doing. So we're trying to crowd in. But the corollary to your statement is that I answered earlier that I really do want us to have this portfolio view so that we can say to private money, well, this is the high growth potential, and we can demonstrate that because we've started doing the tech diligence for you. We've given early grants and they're meeting milestones. Now we can sort of hand it over, right? Because now it becomes a value proposition for you. And we should get out at that point. So I really don't want us to be playing where we don't need to be. That's always value judgment, and there's a lot of art in that as well as science, but that ultimately is our role as far as I'm concerned.
Do you worry, sorry just to interrupt, but on that, do you worry that that's actually a very tricky decision to take? And you may find that there are companies that have received Innovate UK grants that actually think they have great commercial prospects, which have not been properly understood, and that if you are too selective, you will send a negative message about other companies that have had some Innovate UK funding.
Do I worry about it? Yes, I do. And making those choices is going to be hard. But I don't think that the right thing is to give everybody crumbs or even dust. You give everybody crumbs and nobody gets a proper meal and nobody's satiated, and that doesn't help either. So is making decisions hard? Yes. Is not making decisions hard? Yes. Right.
But
so
are you talking about
choose your
when they've already received an Innovate, when you've taken an early decision to put some money in, then you're envisaging subsequently saying company A is really growing fast and company B that also received Innovate UK money is not doing so well. Isn't it one of the extraordinary features of the innovation scene that there may be company B may have a particular, there may be someone out there for whom what company B does is really very valuable, but it's not necessarily immediately obvious to external observers. But you have to let it be out there.
That is true of everything that we do. It's true of research as well, right? You can say, well, God, I was a researcher for a long period of time, and most of the things I did went wrong. And if you'd have said within a year you've got to achieve something, many years were completely fallow, and everything you did just went wrong. It doesn't mean you should stop it. You should absolutely persevere with it. So that is always a judgment call, and that is why we have skilled people. That is what UKRI is for, is to have people that make good judgments. And if you just do it by metrics, you make the wrong answers. You have to have intuition and feel for it. And that requires proper partnership and trust with the delivery partner. I should also say that, by the way, our role doesn't stop, right? So we might stop putting money in, but we should absolutely stay connected to the company to use the heft of UKRI in mobilising the system, in helping Rio to change the regulation, or getting public procurement to pull through the tech, right? So our role doesn't stop, but maybe our money stops. So there's a different dynamic for us as an organisation. Catapults. I think the Catapult network is a huge asset for the country. We've got actually just at lunchtime, I was talking to a founder of a company who said my company would never have raised money were it not for the Catapult giving me access to a facility that I couldn't have raised money to have. I had to have access to that then allowed me to go raise, and the company became very successful. So the Catapults are a great network and a real asset for us. My only real feeling on it is that I think that we have given them the wrong metrics and the wrong incentivization, where we've sort of tried to tell them to touch as many companies as possible rather than to generate as much value as possible. And those are different things, right? So don't have metrics like work with 200 companies. It's not a useful metric. It's not a sensible thing to ask our catapults to do. So give them the right metrics and tell them the outcomes that we want to achieve, which is ultimately grow the economy. And allow them the freedom to do that in the right way for their sector, rather than giving them slightly unhelpful metrics. The question about the public, You know, this is really a core value for me, that I'm spending public money, and I think that we should be delivering outcomes for the public, and you can't deliver outcomes if they don't know about it. It's just reality, right? So you absolutely must talk to them. I had this line when I was a PhD supervisor. I would always say in the first week of my students' tenure that it is no good to spend 99% of your time doing the research and 1% of your time telling people about it and writing the paper and giving the talk, because you write a crap paper and give a terrible talk, and then nobody knows what you've done. And then it's all for naught. So you've got to spend the right ratio of time in actually delivering outcomes to the people who have paid you, given you the privilege of doing that piece of research, because it is a privilege to have public money, to be able to follow your curiosity and to discover new things. It's a privilege, and we should absolutely put effort into communicating that to people. I don't have the gospel and the best ways to do that, and it would be wrong for me to do so, right? Because I'm not an expert in it, but we should work with the people who know more than I do about it to make sure we communicate as best we can.
Thank you very much. Let's just collect the final questions. I think you were hoping for the mic. Yep, and I've got one question from online I want to raise. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you. Petra Heil from the British Antarctic Survey. We heard a lot about growth and the value of the economy. I was just wondering if you can comment of how to do that sustainability aspect to it, and climate and nature awareness about it.
Thank you for asking about sustainability. Anybody who's not yet asked a question? Yeah. Right. There's I thought we had asked. I thought you had asked a question.
No, I wasn't.
Oh, right. Right. You have your chance.
Hi, Ian. Leon Terry from Cranfield. I'd like to know how UKRI can encourage universities to merge.
Oh, right. Oh, especially if there's a nice juicy one in central London that they wish to merge with. Exactly. And then the remaining one that's been upvoted online, actually from Claire Thorne, who serves on the FST Council. What's the role of non-traditional research-performing organisations in supporting UKRI's strategy and generating value?
What does that mean, non-traditional?
Well, I think I suspect, and hang on, let me now give my interpretation of it. The Resolution Foundation, where I am based, has now been accepted as an independent research organisation, and I think for the first time has now received, after a long process, has now got a tiny bit of ESRC money. The model, the process that we went through, assumed that we were an academic institution and running doctoral training programs, and it was very hard to be accepted as an independent research organisation unless you fitted into a model that looked like it was an academic model. Yeah. So that was my personal experience, and I think Claire, but in many other parts, there are many other forms of research-performing organisations that may wish to be retreated as independent research organisations for the purpose of receiving UKRI money.
Yeah. Okay. Again, you're doing a good job of collecting very disparate questions. The question about sustainability, look, value has many forms. Cost avoidance is absolutely a value, and environmental sustainability is a value, and even the Green Book and the Treasury would say that that is value. And so I absolutely, totally look, I've spent my whole life working on trying to provide low carbon energy. It's something that's dear to my heart. So I think that we can use the same metrics, to be honest. I'm not saying that this is growth which is just pounds to GDP. There are lots of ways of demonstrating it. And in fact, cost avoidance may be a bigger lever to affect the country's GDP. And that's the sort of thing that opens up the insurance market and the reinsurance market. And they are trillion-dollar markets, right? So there are lots of ways of generating value. I don't think it's our job to encourage universities to merge. I think it's our job to make sure that we have a healthy research and innovation sector, and the sector is a free sector. And where, in an open market, organisations will often acquire or indeed merge to minimise their overheads and maximise their efficiency and efficacy, and that should be possible. And I'm not against it, nor am I deliberately going out of my way to make it happen. I think it needs to be free to the market. And then the question about non-traditional research organisations, fundamentally, I think we should be supporting the best actors. And that does not mean that we should necessarily be funding the Russell Group universities. We should be supporting the best actors who can deliver the best outcomes for the country, no matter where they come from. And I went through the same process as you, David, in my previous organisation of having to go through eligibility process. I did sort of point out we are owned by the same department, audited by the same National Audit Office, and it's a bit perverse that it takes 12 months to get eligibility criteria. So that's another thing that I will look at and try to improve and make slicker in due course, but it's not something I've got to yet. But fundamentally, the best actors should do the work, and I have no prejudice about where they come from.
Well, look, Ian, you have put so much attention into answering sustained questions for 90 minutes. I'm sorry they were so diverse and divergent, but you were in the middle of you got your racket, you were close to the net, and you were sending them all back. You did not flinch, and we appreciate that, and we also appreciate. I think there were some common themes, and we understand absolutely your focus on showing value. Your belief that there are different ways in which a range of different institutions can come together and that you should try to promote that. Your belief that we have to be more selective. And above all, your personal commitment to this whole enterprise, which came across very clearly. And thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. Thank you for answering so many questions from such a wide range of questioners. And we all wish you absolutely the best of luck with your high responsibilities. Thank you very much.
No, not at all. Thank you all for your time and your interest. Thank you.
Yeah. There's, I think, drinks served around the corner for people who've got the time to stay.
Of course they are.